Linda's wedding day turned into a nightmare when she discovered her husband and best friend were planning to kill her. With the help of her doctor, she faked her own death, exposing every single person who betrayed her. But just when she thought the storm was over, a new one was silently waiting to begin. Stay tuned and watch out. The rain poured heavily that night. Thunder rolled across the sky as lightning flashed through the glass windows of Linda's mansion. She stood by the window, watching the storm rage outside. The raindrops looked like tears running down the glass, just like the ones she used to cry every night. But not anymore. Those tears had dried. It had been 6 months since Linda cut Tina and Chris out of her life completely. The people she once loved were now nothing but a bitter memory. She had told them, "Stay away from me. I forgive you, but we will never be the same again." Now, she had peace. And that peace had a name, George. George had been more than just her driver. He had been her shoulder to cry on, her listener, her protector, and her quiet strength. When she refused to eat, George cooked for her. When she couldn't sleep, he sat by the living room, making sure she wasn't alone. When the pain of betrayal became too heavy, he told her softly, "You've already survived the worst, Linda. The rest is healing." Slowly, she began to heal. She started smiling again. She started dressing up again. And every time George saw her smile, his heart melted a little more. Meanwhile, far away across town, Tina and Chris were sitting in a small, dimly lit apartment, broke and desperate. Tina looked at Chris with teary eyes. "Chris, we have no money, no friends. Nobody wants to help us anymore." Chris clenched his fists. "This is all your fault," he shouted. "If you hadn't joined me to betray her, we wouldn't be here." Tina sighed. "Stop blaming me. We both wanted the same thing, her money. But now that we've lost it, we need to think of a way to survive." Chris frowned. "And what do you suggest?" Tina moved closer to him. "We'll go to her house," she said quietly. "We'll kneel down and cry if we have to. We'll beg her for forgiveness." Chris looked at her like she was crazy. "You want us to beg, Linda? After everything that happened?" Tina crossed her arms. "Do you have another plan? Do you have a better way to eat?" Chris sighed deeply. He had none. After a long silence, he said slowly, "Fine. We'll go. But if she throws us out, that's on you." Back at the mansion, Linda sat in the living room, reading a book as soft music played in the background. George walked in quietly, carrying a tray with her favorite fruit juice. "Madam, I brought you some juice," he said politely. Linda looked up and smiled faintly. "George," she said softly, "how many times will I tell you not to call me madam?" George looked surprised. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I just—" Linda interrupted gently. "You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. You've stood by me when everyone else left. Please, call me Linda." Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt different, warm, calm, and full of unspoken emotion. George placed the tray on the table and sat down slowly. He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "Linda, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Go on." He took a deep breath. "I know I'm just your driver, but would you go on a date with me?" Linda froze. She looked at him, completely speechless. Her heart raced. George smiled nervously. "It's okay if you say no. I just needed to tell you how I feel. You deserve to be loved the right way." Linda's eyes softened. She stood up slowly, walked toward him, and whispered, "George, after everything I've been through, you are the only one who never left my side. You didn't need to ask." She leaned closer. Their eyes met again, and before either of them could think, their lips met. It was slow, tender, full of emotion. George held her gently, afraid to go too far. Linda closed her eyes. For the first time, she felt safe again. This was not the love that broke her. This was the love that healed her. The morning sun was bright over the mansion. Linda and George sat together at the dining table, having breakfast. They looked happy, truly happy. George had just told a small joke, and Linda laughed for the first time in days. Her laughter filled the room like sunshine. Life was finally peaceful again. The pain of betrayal was slowly fading, replaced with love and calmness. George reached for her hand and smiled. "Seeing you smile again," he said softly, "is the best thing that's happened to me." Linda smiled shyly. "You always know what to say." But just as they were about to continue eating, the sound of a car horn echoed outside. George stood up, confused. "Are you expecting anyone?" he asked. Linda shook her head. "No. Who could that be this early?" Moments later, one of the security guards walked in nervously. "Madam, there are 2 people at the gate. They said they want to see you." Linda frowned. "Who are they?" The guard hesitated. It's Tina and Chris, Ma." The glass cup Linda was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. George quickly rushed to her side. Her hands trembled slightly. "Those 2?" she said slowly. "And you opened the gate for them?" The guard swallowed hard. "Yes, Ma. They said it was urgent." "Get out of my sight." Linda snapped, her voice rising. "You're fired." The poor man froze. George placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Linda, please calm down," he said softly. "Don't let them upset you again." Before Linda could respond, her mother walked into the room. "My daughter," she said calmly, "I saw them outside. Please, let them in." Linda turned sharply. "Mummy, no. I don't want to see them. They are snakes. They betrayed me when I needed them most." Her mother sighed and held her hand. "I know, my child. But since they are already here, hear them out. Let them speak. Sometimes forgiveness brings more peace than anger." Linda exhaled slowly. Her mother's words touched her heart, even though her anger still burned. She nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Let them in. But I won't promise to be nice." A few minutes later, Tina and Chris entered the living room. Their clothes looked worn out. Their faces were pale. They both went straight down on their knees the moment they saw Linda. "Linda, please." Tina cried, her voice shaking. "Please forgive us." Chris's eyes were full of tears. He held his chest and said weakly, "We know we hurt you. We were greedy, foolish, and blind. Please, have mercy." Linda folded her arms and stared at them coldly. Her silence was louder than anger. She looked at them the way a stranger would look at 2 beggars. "You remember how you laughed at me when you thought I was dead?" she asked quietly. Tina nodded, crying even harder. "I was stupid, Linda. I was jealous of you. I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, I'm begging you." Her tears rolled down her cheeks and soaked her dress. Chris dropped his head to the floor and cried too. "Please, Linda," he said. "We have nothing left. We just want a second chance." Linda's jaw tightened. She turned her face away, fighting the anger inside her. "George," she said coldly, "take them out of here." But before George could move, Linda's mother stepped forward and held Linda's hand. "My daughter," she said softly, "they are still your younger siblings. I know they wronged you, but let them start again. You have already won. Don't let anger destroy your peace." Linda looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes and sighed deeply. "Fine," she said finally. "I forgive you both." Tina and Chris burst into tears again. Tina crawled closer. "Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much." Linda's tone softened slightly, but her face stayed serious. "I forgive you," she said, "but don't ever betray me again. From now on, you'll both work in my company. Earn your peace through your actions, not your words. Chris raised his head slowly, shocked. You'll let us work for you. Yes, Linda said firmly. That's the only way I can truly see if you've changed. They both nodded quickly. Thank you, Linda. Tina cried. We won't disappoint you again. Linda turned to George and gave him a small smile. George, she said quietly, please, tell the guard is not fired. George nodded and smiled back. I already knew you'd change your mind, he said softly. Linda laughed a little, shaking her head. You know me too well. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Linda and George sat together on the balcony. The moonlight touched their faces softly. George reached for her hand. You did the right thing today, he said. You chose peace over anger. Linda smiled and leaned on his shoulder. I couldn't have done it without you, she whispered. George turned to her slowly. Linda, he said softly, I love you. Linda looked up into his eyes. I know, she whispered. And I love you too. Then, under the quiet moonlight, they kissed, slow, gentle, and full of meaning. This time, it wasn't about pain or loss. It was love, real love, born out of healing. The morning breeze swept gently through the wide glass doors of Smartling Group, Linda's company. Workers were already at their desks, typing, printing, answering phone calls. The sound of progress filled the building. At the center of it all stood George, smartly dressed in a navy blue suit, walking confidently through the hallway. He greeted everyone with his usual calm smile. But this time, there was something different. People respected him. Since Linda made him the new manager, everything had changed. George worked day and night, meeting clients, negotiating contracts, and bringing in investors from Lagos and Abuja. Under his leadership, Smartlink Group had grown faster than anyone expected. New deals were signed. Old debts were cleared. The company was alive again. And through it all, Linda stood by his side, proud and deeply grateful. That afternoon, Linda arrived at the office wearing a beautiful cream dress. Her presence lit up the place. George walked out of his office immediately when he saw her. He smiled. You came earlier than usual, he said softly. Linda smiled back. I wanted to surprise you, she said playfully. The way they looked at each other made it clear. This was love. Pure. Real. Unshakable. The staff whispered quietly among themselves, smiling. Their boss and the manager were like a storybook couple, hardworking, kind, and inseparable. But someone wasn't smiling. Standing by the corner near the reception desk was Tina. Her eyes followed them like a shadow. Jealousy burned quietly in her chest. She had started working in the company 2 weeks ago, and every day she watched George, the way he spoke, the way he led, the way he cared for Linda. Something about him stirred something dangerous inside her. She wanted a man like him. No, she wanted him. Later that evening, after work, Tina stood by the company gate waiting for a taxi when her brother Chris walked up behind her. He had noticed the way she had been looking at George for days. Tina, he said seriously, I need to talk to you. Tina turned and sighed. What is it this time? Chris looked at her sharply. Don't pretend. I see the way you look at him, at George. You need to stop it. Tina frowned. What's your problem? I only admire him. He's hardworking, decent, and smart. Chris stepped closer. Don't lie to me. You don't just admire him. You're falling for him. And if you try anything stupid, you'll destroy everything. Tina looked away, embarrassed but still defensive. Why are you talking like that? She said quietly. Can't a woman want a good man? Chris shook his head. You can want a good man, but not your sister's man. His voice dropped lower. Linda forgave us. Tina. She gave us jobs. She gave us a second chance when nobody else would. Don't ruin it. Don't make her regret trusting us again." Tina's lips trembled. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her eyes glistened with tears. "I'm not trying to hurt her," she whispered. I've never had anyone love me like that before." Chris's voice softened. "I know," he said quietly, "but this isn't how to get love. Don't repeat the same mistake. Linda is a good woman. She doesn't deserve another betrayal, especially not from us." Tina wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "You're right," she said weakly. "I'll stay away." Chris patted her shoulder gently. "Good. Don't make me regret defending you." That same night, Linda and George sat together on the balcony of their home. The air was cool, and the stars glowed faintly above. Linda rested her head on George's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. "You've done so much for this company," she said softly. "I don't even know how to thank you." George smiled and kissed her forehead. "Seeing you happy again is enough thanks for me," he said. Linda looked up at him lovingly. "You're not just my manager, George. You're my peace." George's eyes softened. "And you're my reason to wake up every morning." She smiled, touched his cheek gently, and whispered, "I love you." George held her close. "I love you too." As they sat quietly, enjoying the silence of the night, neither of them knew that inside, Tina's heart was still restless. She had promised her brother she'd stop, but sometimes, temptation doesn't fade overnight. And deep in her heart, she was still asking herself one painful question. Why does he love her and not me? The peace in Linda's world was about to be tested again, not by enemies this time, but by blood. Now, before the story continues, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories. What happens next will shock you to the bone. The morning was bright at SmartLink Group, and the office was busy as usual. The sound of printers, phones, and heels clicking on the tiled floor filled the air. But what truly caught everyone's eye that morning wasn't work. It was George and Linda walking in together, holding hands. She looked elegant in a sky blue gown, while George looked handsome in his dark suit. They smiled at each other as they entered, whispering softly. The staff whispered too. "Huh. These two lovebirds," one of the workers said under her breath. "Love sweeto." Everyone admired them, everyone except Tina. She stood near the reception desk, pretending to arrange files, but her eyes were glued to them. Her heart burned quietly with jealousy. She watched how George held the door for Linda, how he carried her bag, how they looked like a perfect match. In her heart, she said, "If only he looked at me that way." Later that day, in the company boardroom, George stood in front of a group of investors, presenting a new project proposal. He spoke confidently, his voice calm but commanding. Linda watched him proudly from her seat. "Under this new partnership," George said, pointing at the slides, "SmartLink will not only expand to Abuja and Port Harcourt, but also create over 300 new jobs." The investors clapped. Linda's eyes sparkled. She was so proud of him. The man she loved had become the heart of her company. When the meeting ended, Linda walked up to him and smiled. "You are amazing," she said softly. George smiled back. "I told you I'd make you proud." But as they hugged, Tina stood near the door, watching, her heart pounding with a dangerous idea forming inside her. That evening, Tina waited in George's office after everyone had gone home. She sat on his chair, holding one of his pens and staring at his picture with Linda on the desk. "I can't let this go," she whispered. "He should have been mine." Then she looked at the documents on his table, files containing company account details. A wicked thought crossed her mind. She picked up one of the signed forms and quietly snapped a photo with her phone. Then she typed a message on her screen and smiled wickedly. The next morning, Linda arrived at the office early. Before she even entered her office, one of the board members, Mr. Okon, rushed to her, panic all over his face. "Madam Linda," he said quickly, "we have a serious problem." Linda frowned. What happened? He handed her a printed message that had been circulating among the board members overnight. It was a screenshot showing George's signature on a fake transfer form. According to the message, George had moved 25 million Nigerian nairas from the company account to his personal bank account. Linda froze. Her hands began to shake. Her heart started to race. This can't be true," she whispered. When George walked into the office later that morning, everyone's eyes were on him. The whispers were loud this time. People were already judging him. Linda stood by the window of her office, holding the paper tightly. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. George knocked softly and came in. "Good morning, my love," he said gently, but stopped when he saw her face. "Linda? What's wrong?" She turned around slowly. "Tell me it's not true, George," she said in a trembling voice. "Tell me you didn't take money from the company." George's eyes widened in shock. "What?" he said quickly. "Linda, I'd never do that. Who told you that?" Linda threw the paper on the desk. "Everyone has seen it. Your signature is there." George picked up the paper, scanning it fast. "This is fake," he said firmly. "Someone forged this. I swear to you, Linda, I'd never do this." Before Linda could speak, Tina rushed into the office, pretending to be surprised. "Oh my God," she said breathlessly. "Madam, I just heard the news. Is it true?" Linda shot her a sharp look. "Who told you?" Tina swallowed hard. I overheard some of the board members talking. They said George had been planning this for weeks." George turned to her immediately. "Tina, what are you saying?" Tina blinked, pretending to look innocent. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "But I once saw you carrying some files late at night. I didn't want to say anything then." Linda's face turned pale. Her breathing grew heavy. "George," she whispered. "Is that true?" George's voice cracked. "Linda, you can't believe her. I didn't do anything." Tina put her hand on her chest and said softly, "I wish it wasn't true. You've always been kind to me." Then she sighed and turned away, pretending to cry. The office went silent. Linda stood there, tears forming in her eyes. The man she trusted most, the man she loved, was now being accused of stealing from her. George walked closer, his voice shaking. "Linda, please," he whispered. "Look at me. You know me. I'd never betray you." Linda turned away slowly. "George, I need time," she said quietly. "Please, just go." George stood frozen, staring at her. His heart broke. He wanted to speak again, but she wouldn't look at him. He walked out slowly, tears burning his eyes. Tina watched him go, and a small, wicked smile appeared on her face. Her plan was working. George sat alone in his office, his head buried in his hands. The room was dark except for the faint light from his computer screen. Papers were scattered on the floor, the same papers that carried his fake signature. His heart was heavy. His mind was spinning. He couldn't understand how everything changed so fast. Just yesterday, Linda had kissed him good night with love in her eyes. Now she looked at him like a stranger. "God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why is this happening to me?" He wanted to fix everything, to explain, to make her believe him, but she had asked him to leave the office until the investigation was over. His world was falling apart. The door opened slowly. It was Tina. She stood by the doorway, pretending to look nervous. "George," she said softly, "can I come in?" George didn't even look up. "Tina, I'm not in the mood for company right now." Tina walked closer, her heels clicking softly on the tiles. "I know," she said gently. "You don't deserve what's happening. I came to check on you." George sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Tina, please. I'm already broken enough. Just go." But Tina didn't leave. She placed her hand gently on the desk and said, "I just want you to know. I believe you." George finally looked up, confused. You believe me?" Tina nodded quickly. "Of course. I know you'll never steal money from the company. You're too good for that. The problem isn't you, George, it's Linda." George frowned. "What are you talking about?" Tina took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Linda has changed. Ever since she became more richer, she's been proud, controlling. She doesn't trust people anymore. Even you." George's expression hardened. "Tina, stop." But Tina continued, pretending to sound hurt. "She treats everyone like they are beneath her. I've seen the way she talks to people. I'm just telling you the truth, George. Maybe she never really trusted you." George's jaw tightened. He stood up slowly and said firmly, "Tina, listen to me. You might fool others, but you can't fool me. Linda is not perfect, but she's not that kind of woman. I know her heart." Tina blinked, pretending to be shocked. "I was just trying to." George cut her off. "No, you're trying to plant hate in my heart, but it won't work. I love her, Tina. No matter what's happening, I know she's been hurt before. I'll never turn against her." His voice was calm, but full of strength. Tina's plan was falling apart. She forced a small fake smile. "All right," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help." She picked up her purse and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back and said softly, "You'll see what I mean soon." Then she walked out, closing the door slowly behind her. George sat back down and exhaled deeply. His chest was heavy with sadness. He whispered to himself, "Why would she say that about Linda? What's really going on?" Later that evening, Tina sat in her own office, pretending to work. Her eyes were blank. Her mind was restless. She thought about George's words, the way he defended Linda even when his world was collapsing. For a brief moment, guilt flickered in her heart, but she quickly pushed it away. She had gone too far to stop now. Just then, the door opened. Chris walked in quietly and stood by the door, staring at her. "Tina," he said slowly, "can we talk?" Tina forced a smile. "Of course. What is it?" Chris didn't sit. He folded his arms and looked her straight in the eye. "I just came from Linda's office," he said. "She's completely broken because of what's happening to George. And I need to ask you something." Tina's smile faded. Her hands tightened around her pen. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Chris took a deep breath. "I hope you're not involved in this mess." Tina's heart skipped. Her face turned pale for a second, but she quickly forced a fake look of shock. "What? Chris, how could you even say that?" she said, pretending to sound hurt. "Why would I do such a thing?" Chris stepped closer. "Because I know you, Tina. You've been acting strange lately. You stare at George too much. You get angry when Linda praises him. I see things you think no one notices." Tina stood up quickly, pretending to be offended. "Are you accusing me of something?" she snapped. "You think I'll try to destroy George? Or Linda?" Chris stared at her silently for a moment, then said calmly, "I'm not accusing you. Yet. But listen to me carefully." He pointed his finger at her. "If I ever find out that you had a hand in this, even a small one, I won't keep quiet. I don't care that you're my sister. I'll tell Linda everything myself." Tina froze. Her throat went dry. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Chris shook his head and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he said in a low, firm voice, "Don't make the same mistake twice, Tina. You won't survive it this time." He walked out and closed the door behind him. Tina sank slowly into her chair. Her eyes filled with tears. Her plan was still working, but for the first time, her conscience began to whisper. And that whisper was louder than her lies. It was late in the evening. The office was quiet. Most of the workers had already gone home. But inside the SmartLink Group building, the truth was about to come to light. Linda's mother, Madam Linda Sr., had come to see her daughter earlier that evening. But as she walked through the corridor, she heard a voice coming from one of the offices, a low whisper. She stopped and leaned closer. The voice sounded familiar. It was Tina's. At first, Madam Linda thought Tina was on a business call, until she heard the words that made her freeze. "Everything is falling apart," Tina whispered on the phone. "Chris is beginning to suspect me. But I can't back out now. I already sent the fake transfer forms from my laptop. If they find out, I'm finished." Madam Linda's eyes widened in shock. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth to stop a gasp. Tina continued, pacing around her office. "George will take the blame, and Linda will hate him. That's all that matters. Once George is gone, I'll take his place beside her." Tears filled the older woman's eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her heart broke. "Tina," she whispered under her breath. "Oh God, what have you done?" She stepped back quietly and hurried down the hall to Linda's office. Her breathing was heavy. Her voice shook. "Linda," she said, bursting into the room. "I just heard something terrible." Linda stood up quickly. "Mommy, what is it?" Her mother looked at her with pain in her eyes. "My daughter, it's Tina. She's the one behind everything." Linda's eyes widened. "What?" "I just heard her confess on the phone," her mother said firmly. "She forged George's signature. She sent the fake document from her laptop." Linda's knees grew weak. She grabbed the edge of her desk to steady herself. Her voice broke. "No, that can't be true." Her mother held her shoulders. "Go and see for yourself." Minutes later, Linda and her mother stormed into Tina's office. Tina jumped up in fear, almost dropping her phone. Her face turned pale the moment she saw them. Linda's eyes were full of tears, but they also burned with anger. "Tina," she said quietly, "tell me it's not true." Tina stammered. "Linda, Tell me you didn't do it." Linda shouted. Her voice echoed through the office. "Tell me you didn't lie against the man who did nothing but help this company grow." Tina broke down. Her lips quivered. Her knees went weak. She dropped to the floor and started crying uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Linda's heart pounded. Her tears fell freely. "Why, Tina?" she asked painfully. "Why would you do this to me? To George?" Tina covered her face and sobbed. "I was jealous," she said between tears. "I loved him, Linda. I wanted him to see me, not you. But he only had eyes for you. I thought if you turned against him, maybe." She couldn't finish. Her voice cracked. Just then, Chris walked in. He froze at the door, staring at his sister crying on the floor. "Tina," he said softly, "tell me you didn't do this." Tina looked up slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Chris," she whispered. "I did it." Chris's face changed completely. Disappointment and pain filled his eyes. He shook his head slowly. "Tina," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "How could you? After everything Linda did for us." He turned away and wiped his face. "I warned you. I begged you not to ruin this second chance. But you still did it." Tina crawled toward Linda, still crying. "Please forgive me, Linda. Please. I'll do anything." Linda looked at her silently for a long time. Her eyes were red. Her lips trembled. "Tina," she said softly, "you didn't just betray me. You destroyed the only man who ever made me happy." She turned away, unable to look at her sister anymore. The next morning, Linda went to George's house. He was sitting alone on the balcony, staring blankly at the sky. He looked tired, broken, and quiet. When Linda walked up to him, he didn't turn immediately. He thought it was one of his neighbors. But then he heard her voice, soft and shaking. "George." He turned quickly. When he saw her, his heart skipped a beat. Her eyes were full of tears. "Linda," he whispered. "Why are you here?" Linda swallowed hard. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I came to say I'm sorry." George stood still, staring at her. "I should have believed you," she said quietly. "I should have trusted your love instead of my fears." Her voice broke. "I was wrong, George." Tina confessed everything. She was the one who forged the signature. "You were innocent all along." George's lips parted slightly, his eyes filling with tears. "Linda, I don't deserve your forgiveness," she continued, sobbing. "But please, if there's even a small space in your heart for me, forgive me." George stepped forward slowly. He lifted her chin gently with his hand and looked into her eyes. His voice was soft. "Linda," he whispered, "love always forgives." Tears streamed down her cheeks as he pulled her into a tight embrace. She cried on his chest as he held her like he never wanted to let go. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said softly. "And I always will." As they stood there holding each other, the pain began to fade, replaced by peace, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives even after betrayal. Inside, Tina sat quietly in her room, tears running down her face as Chris stood by the door, disappointed and silent. The truth had come out. The lies had ended. But the scars, they would take time to heal. And for Linda and George, their love story had survived another storm. Months had passed since Tina's confession. The wounds had begun to heal. Tina had started therapy and was trying to rebuild her life. Chris had forgiven her. And Linda, she was happy again. Truly happy. With George by her side, her company had grown stronger than ever. The staff respected him deeply, and investors called daily to work with SmartLink Group. George had not only rebuilt the company, he had rebuilt Linda's heart. That evening, Linda's mother had invited everyone to dinner. The dining table was decorated with candles, flowers, and soft music playing in the background. It felt like a night of peace. Linda sat beside George, smiling as her mother and Chris talked about old memories. The laughter around the table warmed her heart. She hadn't felt such happiness in a long time. After dinner, George stood up slowly and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, smiling nervously. Linda looked up at him, confused but curious. Then, George went down on one knee. Linda gasped softly, her eyes widening. Her heart began to race. "George, what are you doing?" she whispered. George looked up at her with tears in his eyes. He held out a small velvet box, opened it, and inside was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. "Linda," he said softly, his voice trembling with emotion. "You've been through so much pain, yet you still learned to love again. You gave me purpose, peace, and happiness. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me." Tears filled Linda's eyes as George continued. "I want to be the man who protects your heart for the rest of my life. The man who will stand beside you in every storm. And the man who will love you completely, forever." He smiled through his tears and asked, "Linda Brown, will you marry me?" The room went silent. Linda's mother covered her mouth, already crying. Chris's face broke into a big smile. Linda stood up slowly, her hands shaking. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked into George's eyes and whispered, "Yes, yes, George. I'll marry you." George slipped the ring gently onto Linda's finger. She threw her arms around him, crying on his shoulder. Everyone clapped as they kissed softly under the warm glow of the lights. The room erupted in joy. Her mother clapped and hugged her tightly, crying tears of happiness. Chris hugged George, smiling proudly. The woman who had once been betrayed, broken, and left for dead, was now standing in love's arms, healed, whole, and finally free. From this story we understand that true love forgives, heals, and restores what pain once destroyed. Jealousy will always blind you, but humility can rebuild even the most broken heart. People may lie, but truth always finds its way to the light. Never give up on love. Sometimes, the right person enters your life after the biggest heartbreak. Should Tina be fully forgiven and accepted back into the family? What lesson did you personally learn from Linda's story? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. We'd love to hear what you think. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring Nigerian stories every week. Comment where you're watching from. And stay tuned for the next amazing story from African Folktales and Epic.